Welcome back to Building Foundations by DGI Waterproofing. This is our deep dive series where we really get into the nuts and bolts of protecting your home.
Yeah, and if you caught our last session, we were talking all about mold, what causes it, how to stop it.
Which, honestly, leads perfectly into today's topic.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, despite our best efforts, water damage just happens.
It really does. A pipe bursts, maybe heavy rain finds a way in, or something overflows, and suddenly you're looking at a wet patch on your drywall.
And that feeling staring at that soggy spot,
Yeah.
wondering, okay, what now? Is this serious? Can I just dry it?
Exactly. It's super common, and people are often, really unsure about the next step. Do you need to replace it? Can it be saved?
And making that call quickly is actually, well, it's critical, isn't it? It's not just about looks.
Not at all. We're talking about potential mold, structural issues down the line, and yeah, the cost, if it's not handled right away, it impacts your home's health.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack a couple of key resources we use our guide. Do you have to replace drywall after water damage? And another one we call water damage drywall, repair or replace.
Right. We want to use these to help you, the listener, understand what's actually happening when drywall gets wet. When maybe you can save it, and crucially, when replacement is really the only safe bet.
Because knowing what to do and doing it fast can make a huge difference. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is drywall, and why does water mess it up so badly?
Sure. So drywall, it seems simple, right? It's basically gypsum plaster, sort of compressed, and then sandwiched between two layers of paper.
And that paper is the first problem when water hits.
Absolutely. The paper facing acts just like a sponge or a wick. It absorbs water almost instantly and starts pulling it deeper into that gypsum core.
Okay. And what's happening inside to the gypsum?
Well, gypsum itself isn't designed for water. When it gets saturated, it actually starts to soften, even dissolve a little bit. The board loses its density, its strength, it gets mushy, crumbly.
So the structural integrity just goes.
Pretty much. And then there's the hidden issue. If water gets trapped behind the drywall, maybe there's insulation back there, or a vapor barrier, or it's just an exterior wall in a damp basement.
Like we see a lot in basements around Toronto, Mississauga, Vaughan, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those conditions make drying incredibly difficult. That trapped moisture becomes a perfect breeding ground for mold and rot, all happening inside the wall where you can't even see it initially.
And it doesn't just stay in the drywall, does it?
No, definitely not. Water wicks. It moves into the wood studs, the insulation becomes saturated, it can seep down into the subfloor. Poor ventilation or high humidity, especially in basements or those cold walls, just makes everything worse. A small leak can spread surprisingly far behind the scenes.
One of the guys talks about the science behind the soggy wall, kind of breaking it down by time. What happens right away, say in the first day?
Okay, yeah, so 0 to 24 hours, the paper is soaking up water. It might start to peel away from the gypsum core. The gypsum itself starts weakening, dissolving slightly. The board is definitely losing strength, getting softer.
Then comes the next stage.
Right, the 24 to 48 hour window. This is really critical. After this point, saving the drywall gets much harder. Why? Because mold spores, which are basically everywhere, they start to germinate in that damp material. Plus, the water keeps migrating, moving deeper.
And if it stays wet longer than 48 hours?
That's usually considered the point of no return for the drywall itself. Mold growth typically gets established within that 24-48 hour period. Once that fungus starts growing, it reproduces rapidly, releasing spores. And structurally, the drywall is usually pretty compromised by then. It's just not sound anymore.
Okay, so that timeline is key. Which brings us back to the big question everyone asks. Can you actually save wet drywall? Is it ever possible?
Well, the short answer, based on the resources, and honestly, what we see day in, day out at DGI is maybe. But it's really conditional.
Depends on a few things.
Yeah, it really depends. How long was it wet? How soaked did it get? And crucially, what's behind it? Is there insulation trapping moisture?
So is there like a best case scenario where you might be able to dry it out?
There is sort of an optimistic scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You'd need to have caught the leak really fast, like within that first 24 hours.
Okay.
And it needs to be a small area, just damp, not totally saturated. Also, the water source has to be category 1, clean water. Think a supply line break, maybe rainwater, not sewage or anything contaminated.
Right, clean water makes a difference.
A huge difference. And the final piece, there can't be any insulation or a vapor barrier right behind that wet spot because those things will trap moisture and prevent drying.
Okay, so if all those things line up perfectly and you want to try and save it, what do you actually do? First, stop the leak immediately. That's step 0.
Oh.
Then pull off baseboards, any trim around the wet area to get air circulating right to the edge of the wall.
Makes sense. Then just fans.
Not just any fans. You need serious drying power. Industrial air movers aimed directly at the wet spot, plus a powerful dehumidifier running constantly. And we're not talking a day or two, minimum 3 to 5 days, maybe longer.
And how do you know it's actually dry? Just touching it isn't enough.
Absolutely not. This is critical. You have to use a proper moisture meter designed for building materials. Drywall can feel dry on the surface, but still hold a lot of moisture inside or in the wood studs behind it.
So you need to test the wall and what's behind it.
Yes. Use the meter on the drywall, check the framing studs, check any insulation nearby. And even if it was clean water, it's smart to disinfect the area too, just to knock down any potential bacteria or stray mold spores.
It sounds like trying to do this properly without professional gear, especially in a basement, would be tricky. It's very difficult. The amount of air movement and dehumidification needed is usually beyond what typical household fans and dehumidifiers can achieve effectively, especially against trapped moisture.
Let's talk about those moisture levels. The resources give actual percentages, don't they?
They do. Generally, for drywall, readings between 0.2% and 1% moisture content are considered acceptable, basically dry.
Okay.
Once you get up between 1% and maybe 16%, that's concerning. It needs active drying attention right away. Hitting 17% or more, that's generally considered damp, definitely needs intervention.
And above that?
Over 20%, the material is likely too saturated. Replacement is usually the recommendation at that point.
But there's an even stricter rule professionals often use.
Yeah, one of the sources points out that many restoration professionals will actually recommend replacement if the moisture meter reads anything higher than 1%.
Wow, just 1%.
It highlights how even seemingly low levels of moisture can be problematic long-term, and how tough it is to judge without accurate measurement. It shows the value of a professional assessment.
Which kind of brings us to the reality check. In theory, you might save it sometimes, but in practice,
Yeah.
what do we usually see at DGI?
Honestly, most significant water intrusions, especially if they weren't caught immediately, end up needing replacement. The window for safely drying it out is just really small.
So what are the definite signs that tell you, okay, this drywall has to go?
Number 1, if it was wet for more than 48 hours, that critical mold window we talked about, assume mold growth has started inside even if you can't see it yet.
Okay, time is a major factor. What else?
Visible mold. Any spot, doesn't matter how small. If you see mold on the surface, the whole sheet needs to come out. Cleaning the surface just isn't enough. It's inside the material.
Makes sense. What about physical changes?
Yeah, if the drywall is bulging, warped, sagging, or crumbling, that's a clear sign its structural integrity is gone. It's permanently damaged. Replacement is mandatory.
And smells. Should you trust your nose?
Absolutely. A musty, damp odor is a huge red flag. It almost always means there's mold or mildew growing somewhere, likely hidden inside the wall cavity.
Okay, and you mentioned water categories before. That's critical for the replacement decision too, right?
Hugely critical. If the water came from a contaminated source, that's category 3 or black water, think sewage backup, river flooding, even water that's been standing stagnant for more than 3 days. Anything touched by black water is highly contaminated and must be removed and replaced safely. Period.
No trying to clean that.
No way. And even category 2, gray water, like from a washing machine overflow, dishwasher leak, maybe a toilet bowl with urine, but no feces, it still contains contaminants. It requires very thorough cleaning, and often porous materials like drywall still need to be replaced, at least partially.
One more thing, what if the insulation behind the wall got wet?
That's another mandatory replacement trigger. If the insulation is wet, the wall needs to be opened up, that wet insulation removed and replaced. Wet insulation just holds moisture forever, prevents the wall cavity from drying, and becomes a perfect mold factory. Trying to dry drywall with wet insulation behind it, it's basically impossible.
So, trying to cut corners and save drywall in any of the situations sounds like a really bad idea.
It's a gamble that almost never pays off. We see it all the time. People try to dry it themselves or paint over a stain thinking they've fixed it. Then they call us months later.
Why? What happens?
The musty smell comes back stronger. Maybe the paint starts peeling or bubbling. Or worse, they discover mold has spread significantly through the walls, maybe even into other rooms.
Because the underlying problem wasn't actually solved. What are the biggest risks of not replacing compromised drywall?
Well, the number 1 risk is mold. It thrives in damp, dark places. It will continue to grow unseen in the wall cavities, behind baseboards, spreading spores into your living space.
Which is a major health concern, right?
Absolutely. Breathing in mold spores can trigger allergies, asthma attacks, and other respiratory problems, especially for kids, the elderly, or anyone with existing sensitivities. It's a serious health cost, as the sources highlight. You can't put a price on healthy air quality.
And beyond health.
Structural damage. That persistent moisture doesn't just affect the drywall. It can rot the wood, framing the studs and plates that hold your walls up. Over time, that weakens the structure of your house.
Wow. Okay, and there's an insurance angle too?
Yeah, the insurance trap. Many policies actually require professional remediation for water damage claims to be approved. If you try a DIY fix on a significant problem or don't have proper documentation from certified pros showing it was dried correctly,
Your claim could get denied.
it definitely could. Insurance companies want proof that the job was done right to prevent future issues, like mold claims later on. Professional assessment and detailed records are often key.
Okay, so when professionals do need to remove drywall, is it always ripping out the whole wall?
Not necessarily. A common technique, especially for damage low on the wall, like from basement leaks, is what we call a flood cut.
A flood cut, what's that?
Instead of taking the whole sheet down, we make a clean horizontal cut across the wall, usually about 12 to 24 inches above the highest point the water reached. Then we remove the drywall below that cut. Ah, okay. Why do that?
Two main reasons. First, it ensures we remove all the water-damaged and potentially contaminated drywall. Second, it opens up that lower wall cavity.
So you can see inside.
Exactly. We can inspect the studs, remove wet insulation, and most importantly, get powerful drying equipment inside the wall to dry out the framing and the sill plate thoroughly. It prevents hidden moisture from festering.
And it probably makes the repair easier later.
Much easier. You're just patching and finishing that lower section, not re-drywalling the entire wall. It's really effective for basement waterproofing situations or localized plumbing leaks near the floor.
Underpinning all of this, whether you save or replace, seems to be knowing for sure if things are actually dry. You mentioned moisture meters.
Yes, a thorough moisture inspection is absolutely essential. It's so common for homeowners to clean up the visible water, maybe run a fan and think, okay, problem solved.
But the moisture is hiding. Often, yes. Behind the baseboards, under flooring, wicked up inside the wall cavity, absorbed into the wood framing. That hidden moisture is what leads to mold coming back, that persistent musty smell, or even slow structural decay.
So professionals have tools to find that.
Right. We use non-invasive moisture meters that can read levels through materials and sometimes thermal imaging cameras. Thermal cameras can show temperature differences. Cooler spots often indicate hidden moisture behind a surface.
So you're not just guessing.
Absolutely not. These tools let us confirm with data that the materials are back to a safe, dry standard. You really can't declare a water damage job finished without that verification. Our article on signs of water damage in your basement actually touches on some of the subtle clues of hidden moisture too.
Okay, let's talk about timing and money. Because when water hits, people worry about how long it takes and how much it costs. Time is critical, right?
Every hour counts. Both sources emphasize this. The clock starts ticking the moment the water intrusion happens.
So what's a typical timeline for a professional response?
Ideally, the initial assessment, inspecting, finding the source, starting documentation should happen the same day if possible.
Then the drying.
If professional drying is needed, using the air movers and dehumidifiers, that typically runs for 3 to 7 days. Depends on how much water and how large the area is.
And if things need to be removed.
Demolition, taking out wet drywall, insulation, maybe flooring, that usually takes a day or two.
What if mold is found?
Mold remediation adds time. Proper containment, safe removal, cleaning that can add another 2 to 5 days, depending on the extent.
And then putting it all back together.
The rebuild phase, new drywall, taping, mudding, sanding, priming, painting, that's often another 3 to 7 days.
So the big takeaway on timing is be fast.
Be fast. Getting professional drying or removal started within that crucial 24-48-hour window drastically cuts the risk of major mold problems. Wait longer than 72 hours, and mold is often so established that replacement of porous stuff like drywall becomes pretty much unavoidable, no matter the water source.
Okay, now the tough part. The cost. People obviously think about DIY costs versus hiring pros.
Right. DIY seems cheaper up front, just materials, maybe renting a fan. But the true cost of fixing water damage correctly is more involved.
What are some ballpark figures from the resources?
Well, one source mentions basic drywall repair replacement labor might be $1 to $3 per square foot. But a focused project to fix water-damaged drywall, including proper drying and maybe mold prevention steps, is typically estimated between $300 and $850, averaging around $550.
And for a whole water damage restoration project?
The U.S. average, covering everything from extraction and drying to demo and rebuild, is cited as averaging around $3,814. The typical range might be somewhere between, say, $1,300 and $6,300, really depending on how bad the damage is.
But the real kicker comes if mold develops, right?
Oh, yeah. Mold remediation gets expensive fast. The average cost is pegged around $2,200, but it climbs dramatically with size. Small contained areas might be $300, $800, medium areas maybe $1,500, $4,000, but large-scale mold problems, easily $5,000, $15,000, or even more.
So that idea of the hidden costs of getting it wrong.
It's very real. The potential costs of dealing with widespread mold, fixing structural rot later, maybe losing an insurance claim, those costs almost always dwarf the expense of doing the job right the first time with professionals. Saving a bit now can lead to massive expenses and headaches later.
It really puts it in perspective. So, bottom line, when should someone absolutely call in a professional team like DGI?
Honestly, for anything more than a tiny, quickly dried spill, if you've had a burst pipe, serious rain leak, any kind of basement flooding, a leak that went unnoticed for more than a day or two, call for help.
And definitely if the water wasn't clean.
Absolutely. Any gray water or black water situation requires professional handling for safety and proper cleanup. Also, if the affected area is large, if you can't pinpoint the source, or if you even suspect damage might be hiding behind walls or under floors.
And the insurance aspect again.
Yes, if you plan to file an insurance claim, getting professionals involved from the start is usually the best course. We can document everything properly.
When DGI comes into a situation like this, what's the approach? It's more than just the drywall, right?
Definitely. We look at the whole picture, the whole system. First, we find and address the source of the water. Is it a foundation crack needing repair, a drainage issue, a plumbing leak? We fix that first.
Then tackle the damage.
Right. We remove anything unsalvageable, the compromised drywall, wet insulation. Then we use our professional drying equipment to make absolutely sure everything left behind, like the wood framing, is thoroughly dried to the proper standard, verified with moisture meters. And depending on the situation, we might recommend preventative measures like sealing foundation walls.
The goal is really restoring the home to being safe and healthy, not just patching a hole.
Exactly. Safer, drier, healthier. That's what we aim for on every job, whether it's in Mississauga, Vaughan, Richmond Hill, Markham, or right here in Toronto.
So wrapping this all up, what are the absolute key takeaways for homeowners facing wet drywall?
Okay, number one, time is critical. Act fast. That 24-48-hour window is huge. Number two, don't guess about dryness, use moisture meters. Levels over 17%, maybe even over 1%, often mean replacement. Get a professional assessment if you're unsure. They have the tools and know-how to see the hidden picture. Remember, insurance often requires pro work. And ultimately, prioritize health, don't risk mold.
So that old saying, when in doubt, throw it out, kind of applies to wet drywall.
It really does, especially if you're past that initial drawing window or see any red flags. Cutting out the damaged sections and properly drawing everything else is the only way to be sure you're protecting your house and your family's health long term.
Which leads to a final thought, perhaps.
Yeah.
When you're looking at that wet drywall, maybe the question isn't just, can I afford to replace this?
Exactly. Maybe the real question is, can I afford not to replace it? Considering the potential future costs of mold, structural repairs, and health problems if you don't address it properly right now, that upfront investment in doing it right really does prevent much bigger headaches down the road.